Yeah, I'm here with author Charles Jacobs of the Pangaea Solution, which is our May feature in the Great Indie Reads Book Club, and I'm here to ask him a few questions today. So the first question I wanted to ask you, Charles, is where did you get the inspiration to write this book?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. This was my first book, and I think, to some degree, it's hard to pin down one inspiration because it's everything in your life, that you put together. In some ways, the inspiration finds you, and you write your book. You get to the next book, and then you go looking for inspiration, and sometimes it's a little easier to be specific. But I think it's sort of began with a couple of different things. One is like a lifelong interest in spying and espionage. I got started, I think, probably first grade. I pulled out a book called Codes and Ciphers. And the teacher told me that it wasn't nice to keep secrets and took the book away from me, which of course only inspired me all the more and got me interested in code ciphers. And then I got into spying, and my sister had a club with her friend and about spying, and that sounded really intriguing to me. And then eventually I started my own spy clubs and all that kind of stuff, and just studied the craft. And in fact, on my website, charlesjacobs.com, I have a whole set of like little descriptions of sort of the evolution of all that stuff. With regard to thrillers, I never really read that much fiction when I was a kid. I read nonfiction because the fiction that was available to me really wasn't that inspiring. But then I think I was about 13 and I pulled out a copy of Casino Royale by Ian Fleming. And that just really kind of turned my life around with regard to reading fiction, because it was a book I could really kind of, it kind of hit me in the gut. And then I devoured all the James Bond novels, and, I read books by Alistair MacLean and Frederick Forsyth and so forth, and just enjoyed the hell out of it. With regard to biotech, I think the earliest inspiration was actually an episode of Hawaii Five-0 back in 1970 called Three Dead Cows at Makapu, about a scientist who was trying to spread a virus around Hawaii. And that really kind of got me intrigued, this whole biotech stuff. And then there was a great movie called The Satan Bug, based on a novel by Alistair MacLean. And that came out in there, I guess it was from the 60s. I saw it on TV in the early 70s. And that also really got me thinking about that. And then the James Bond book, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, was also about bioweapons. And so I think that's where a lot of that background came from. But then there are like specifics in the book where you get, I pulled on things that I've experienced. So the setting, which is Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, is like a college town in the middle of the cornfields. It's where I grew up, but I think I also liked it as a location because it was sort of the quintessential America. It's the heartland, and there's the farmer's daughters in there, who now works for a bank, but and then the car that he drives is an AC Cobra, and that's sort of the closest automotive equivalent to the trusty steed of the cowboy hero kind of thing. So I think that's where some of those things came from. There was also, it's interesting, the University of Illinois had an experimental farm outside of town that they had a barbed wire fence around and stuff. And my friends and I sort of happened onto that on a hike one time, and it's just sort of hitting each other about what might be going on the other side of that fence. And that became part of the inspiration as well. And then the idea of sort of, there's some mathematics in here around a process called Monte Carlo simulation, which is around how do you model a very complex system to determine the kinds of outcomes that could happen. And so I did a lot of work on this in my work in financial services, either with financial stuff or even with weather modeling for insurance. And so I was able to sort of take that as like, what would happen if the bad guys got a hold of that and use that to optimize the spread of this virus. So it's just specific things like that. And then like with regard of an airplane bomb, I was actually working on a project in London in 1988. I came back in October, but somebody on my team stuck around for the rest of the time, was supposed to come back on December 23rd. And if he had his boarding pass ready, he would have been on Pan Am Flight 103 that was blown up and went down over Lockerbie. But luckily, he had some extra work to do and delayed his trip a couple of days. So if I'd been around on the project at that point, it might have been me. But so anyway, that's sort of where some of those elements come together.
Wow, thank you for all the anecdotes and the inspiration. It's super interesting to see how this book is a product of so many different ideas and everything. If Anybody who's watching this who would like to come and ask Charles their own questions or to hear more about, you know, life as a writer and specifics to the book and any questions about the book, I invite you to join our meeting with the author on Sunday, June 2nd at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can RSVP through our book club's website, which will be copied down below. So thank you, Charles.